Welcome to episode 33 of the Carnism Debunked podcast. Today's guest is Piyush Patil, an Indian animal rights activist who has also been involved in activism in the UK animal rights scene. The notion that veganism is white privileged has been rife in our societies in recent times, heard from the mouths of Western progressives as well as non-vegans in countries like India. But is there any truth to it? In this episode, Piyush and I critique this argument, delving into concepts such as the caste system, whether veganism is a Western idea, and the phenomenon known as the bigotry of low expectations. We hope you enjoy the episode. So, Piyush, welcome to the show. Really pleased to have you on today.
Thank you, George, for giving me this opportunity and accepting my request to speak up about this issue.
Yeah, I really appreciate the fact that you came to me about this, because I think this is something that more people from ethnic minority backgrounds, especially in the UK, need to be talking about. Because when I talk about this stuff, I get the typical labels, you're a this, that, you're a cis white male, you can't say what white privilege is, and you can't talk about if it's accessible to people in India and blah, blah, blah. So it's good that I have... tell us about your background, actually, Piyush. Tell us about where you're from originally and the kind of activism you do these days.
So I'm originally from Pune. It's a city near Mumbai in India. So I was born here. I finished my undergraduate in law. Then I came to London for my master's, where I studied animal law as one of my modules, which was pretty interesting. And then I started doing activism in London. I started doing Anonymous for the Voiceless. We stand for the animals, Earthlings Experience, speciesism, and others. And then that's how I started understanding the importance of activism. I was vegan since 2019, but I was more like an apologetic vegan, and slowly getting it. And yeah, I mean, when I look back at myself, I cringe completely, looking at how I used to handle the situations and how I could have done much better. But then I realized, I mean, this is a massive fucking issue, and this is not just about me or my dietary preferences. And yeah, then watching Paul Bashir's speech and his workshop during one of the big AVs, that just kind of set me off. And then I was like, no matter what place in the world I am, I have to keep speaking up for the animals.
Yeah, no, very well said. And that's interesting you mentioned about that, because someone you and I will both know, actually, I'm actually planning on getting him on for a podcast soon to talk about this, because his story is quite similar to yours about he started off like an apologist, but this was at least you were only an apologist for like a year. This dude was an apologist possibly for like a decade or something before he changed.
God.
So I'll hopefully drop that podcast with him in the next few months, but we've agreed to do it, and you'll know who it is once I put it up. But let's get into this.
Wait, is that not Paul Bashir? I thought you were talking about Paul Bashir.
It's not Paul Bashir. No, it's not Paul Bashir. I think Paul Bashir was fairly... I think he got pretty hardcore into animal rights activism shortly after he went plant-based for health. But his like you was quite a quick kind of transition to, now I have to be an activist. Now this is about the animals. But no, the guy I'm going to have on soon, I think he was an apologist for far, far, far too long. And then he realized, that's the wrong road to go down. So let's get into it then. Let's talk about this kind of concept that veganism or animal rights is this kind of white people issue or a white privileged issue. Why is it that you wanted to have this discussion today, and what do you make? What are your experiences of hearing that argument, and what do you think of it?
Yes. So, as a vegan, as an activist, you come across billion reasons, billion excuses, which, they do sound reasonable when you listen to them on the face level. But then if you dig further, you realize there's no substance in those arguments. They're just hollow excuses. And One of those excuses is I hear a lot of times, and not just from non vegans, but also from the vegans within the community and also within the activist community. And I'd like to approach this with the in the most sensitive fashion as I could. People think I'm unhinged when I speak, but I'll do my best to be, sensitive and considerate about everything that's in this issue. So, yeah, ever since we first spoke, I started thinking a lot about it and I started gathering perspectives and I made some quick points to address every single sub issue this issue has. So, yes, you hear that a lot of time. It's a white privilege, it's a white thing. Veganism is a white concept. Um, so, if you try to address it, it's basically, it doesn't hold pretty well because it's a red herring to
Hmm.
begin with, because it's shifting the focus from the animals to the persons who are making the arguments.
Hmm.
And the and I don't blame anyone specifically for it because yeah, a lot of people don't understand veganism. Even me, even if I look at myself, I keep learning a lot of new things every day. But these certain things, they are quite they're important to be addressed as soon as possible, and get rid of them from within the system. So one of the excuses I hear from people, sometimes they don't even look at my profile and then they comment. They make the comments that, okay, that's your privilege. I mean, it's like, okay, what privilege do you have in order for you not to stab another animal when you don't need to?
Hmm.
And so I'll address this from three different perspectives. So the first one is, when non-vegans say it, from the non-vegan perspective, it's usually a pretty straightforward deflection. We hear all sorts of excuses, and so I'm not inclined to take that very seriously, and I know that it's form of a deflection. And another interesting thing I've heard a lot, not a lot, but I've heard a number of times, is when I used to do activism in London, people used to say, why are you doing this here? I was like, what do you mean? They said, why don't you go back and do it in your own country? Why are you imposing your culture in in the UK? I was like, do you see those couple of people over there? They're white. They're born and raised in the UK.
Who was telling you that, Piyush, in London? Was it Indian people in London, or was it white British people?
It was a okay. I would say 3 or 4 times it were white people, white British people. I would say, judging from their accent and
Yeah.
obviously their skin color, I'm pretty sure they were white. And one of the person, I would um, recite the sentence word by word. She said, you should go back to your country and you should do this, and you should let other people live peacefully. And the funny thing is, I asked her, where are you from? She said she was a Ukrainian refugee. I was like, okay. I mean,
Yeah.
I was speechless.
So it
But
seems like you've heard this. It seems like you're getting some kind of hate from many angles. So it seems like maybe Indians are telling you this is white privilege and why are you spreading this in India. And then you come to the UK and
Mhm.
you say, okay, I'll do it here. And then they say, go back to your own country.
Yeah, and I'll be very straightforward. I've had like 1,000 of conversations, and it were only 3 or 4 people, so it wasn't a big number.
Mm,
So I think people are quite open-minded, and they are very considerate when they speak, even if they don't like the way I speak, or if they don't like my skin color, they don't like my accent. They, they usually don't attack it unless it's someone who is crazy. And
mm.
well, I mean, you hear all sorts of excuses, so I wouldn't be surprised to hear this one.
And
And another angle I'd like to address from this is, I think, the core of the issue, because these you can say that these are excuses, you can just discard them quickly. But when vegans say it within the community, when the activists say it, that's a bigger issue,
oh,
because
yeah.
usually it's, it's people leaning towards the left or the leftist who say that, and I get where they're coming from. They're trying to be more considerate. They're trying to um, be agnostic about the morality in the East or in the third world countries. I understand where they're coming from. However, it's still, it has double standards there, because there's a lot of ideologies they would like to impose regardless of someone's skin color, which, as I'm sure you're pretty aware of what's been happening in the past few days. They have no issues with that. But at the same time, when it comes to veganism, when it comes to victimizing non-human animals, I really don't understand. And this is not good for Indians as well, because I understand they're trying to do their best and they're trying to be considerate. But what happens usually, it creates a sort of a attitude where they're like, we are moral people, but if you're not moral, that's fine. I mean, we're not here to judge you. Maybe you're not capable of being moral. That's one of the meanings you could take out from the whole whole discussion. And I think that's harmful, because I think obviously we all are capable of making moral choices. And
Mm.
now this is going to get me a lot of hate from other people, but I'm an objectivist. I'm a realist. So I think morality, it's not dependent upon a culture or skin color or anything. It's just, they're facts about human mind, and you can navigate through it without worrying about someone having different opinions. It's pretty easy. That's a topic for another debate, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm gonna say that could enter a whole. We could go down a whole rabbit hole there with the whole objective subjective morality thing. But who um who are the people in India saying that this is a white people thing? Who are those people, and why do they say that?
um, Usually they tend to use the word it's a Western concept instead of
Mm,
white, but I think they equivocate both of them. All
right.
they mean the same thing. Um, so I think there are all sorts of people you see here, my relatives, my friends, or random people in comment section. All of them, they use the same excuses to try to justify their existing actions.
And why? Uh, Actually, I just want to see if you've heard of this thing before. It was actually Soy Theist who introduced me to this concept. Do you know of the activist Soy Theist?
I must have seen him. I'm not sure who you're exactly referring to.
Yeah, his name's Aditya. He's Indian himself. He's from the
Hmm.
Assam region of India. And he is also very, very vehemently against this idea that veganism is a Western or a white concept. And he says it's extremely insulting to brown people, black people, whoever to say this. There's a form of racism called the bigotry of low expectations, where it's usually this kind of like, so it's not like the kind of far right out and out racism. It's more like this kind of leftist patronizing racism where it's like caring about animals is above Piyush. George can care about animals. He's white. It's within his means. But Piyush, I think it's a bit above him. Like, so it's this extremely condescending, racist thing that they're not outly saying, but
Hmm.
it's what they're kind of clearly thinking. Like, do you think that that's? Do, are you familiar with that concept? And do you think that that's coming from some of the Indian people who are saying this, or do you think that's more just coming from the kind of woke white Westerners who genuinely see like brown people as like below them but won't admit it?
Yeah, I've seen that phenomenon happen. I didn't know about the exact term which you used right now.
Mm.
But yeah, I've seen that phenomenon happen in different forms. So I think it's the excuses they give in India. All they say is, so there are completely different elements to this now. So when Indians say that it's a Western concept or it's a white concept, they have this image of inferiority where they are very they feel repulsed by anything that's Western because they feel like it's an attack. It's an attempt to destroy their existing culture, their existing practices,
Mm.
and I understand where they're coming from. But again, it's a genetic fallacy. You can't look at who is making the argument. You can't dismiss an argument from because of the source it came from. You have to judge the argument on its merits. And
Yeah.
yeah, so I get it's some sort of insecurity when Indians say that. And yeah, I just hope they look beyond that and they address to the claims and look at the merits of the claim instead of trying to um, you know remove it completely altogether.
But here's the thing with non-vegans, though, Piyush, as we both know. Do you think they really mean it, or do you think they're just bullshitting? Do you think they? Do you think they actually? I mean, they're more than happy, I'm sure, to take on Western things in other areas of life. Like, I'm sure they might watch a Western movie and they won't go, "Oh, this is a Western movie." So, is it just, or is it the case actually that there are people who just don't want anything to do with the West? All I'm saying is, are they being genuine here, or are they just being the typical non-vegan who's just picking and choosing what it is that they have distaste about?
Right. So this phenomenon does exist, even if you're not talking about veganism, even if you're talking about something else.
Hmm.
I don't know, some sort of education, some sort of medicine, because there's Ayurveda in India, and because people know that it's mostly ineffective, they usually try not to defend it. And when things get sideways, and when things go sideways, they just go to the hospitals and take the normal treatments of the Western origins and stuff like
Right.
that. So this phenomenon does exist, and for non-vegans, they just find it as an excuse because it's easy for them to hop onto something that already exists in the society to justify it, to justify as an answer for this,
Yeah.
or use it as a comeback.
The irony is, Piyush, they will dismiss veganism as a Western concept, and then they'll get heart disease from their heavy meat and dairy diet, and then end up taking some drugs by Pfizer or GlaxoSmithKline made by an American corporation. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, and that's a serious issue. People need to, just be mature enough to dismiss the argument based on its merits and not just of its origin. And another thing that we didn't cover when it comes from the white folks in the West, when they say that, for uh, indigenous people, or there's a term, something like that.
Mm.
If someone is from a different country, they have different sets, they have different morality, and we should try our best not to impose that. Again, that's condescending. I'm not
Hmm.
saying that directly trying to be condescending, but that's how it works out in the society. You are not doing them a favor by letting them continue with something that's harmful for themselves or for the society. And at the same time, you have double standards which you need to address. There's a lot of moral confusion. And I can understand it's not easy to navigate in this world and try to make the most moral choice. But there are some things you need to understand. They're like pretty obvious that you don't need to stab me in the throat. Morality is not that different. As an objectivist, I can make case some other day.
Yeah, and I feel that one of the big inconsistencies there is they would condemn horrific practices done by other cultures when it's towards, I don't know, women. Like if a woman's been stoned to death in Saudi Arabia, any
Hmm.
sensible person who's using this terrible argument is not going to go, "Oh, it's their culture. We shouldn't impose our values on them." Of course, we should put in the work to try to stop, gay people being hanged and women being stoned to death in these countries. Um, it just seems like it's a huge speciesist thing here because the animals are the only ones where they're kind of willing to say, yeah, if it happens in another culture, I don't want to be a white Westerner imposing my values onto these people. When actually they would be more than happy to do that in the cases of stoning and all these kind of things. Although some of them actually, Piyush, wouldn't, because we've seen how insane some of
I
these
have.
people are now on the left. So it genuinely wouldn't surprise me actually if some of these people said it was white saviorism to stop stoning in the Middle East.
Yep. And yeah, you often see that when people support a social issue which is different from veganism, and they tend not to address some really important parts of the stance they're taking or the country they're supporting. Again, I don't want to get into something that's political, and
Mm.
that's not the topic for today, but there's a lot of moral confusion that people need to address, and they need to sit down and genuinely think uh, from a more genuine place, instead of doing something that amounts into virtue signaling. I'm not saying the virtue signal consciously, but it happens subconsciously. And there's like a billion factors. We don't know why that happens. We don't know how that happens. But if it's happening, we obviously need to stop the virtue signaling and focus on the virtues.
And let's get into this whole thing now to help a lot of my audience understand, because I think specifically through an Indian lens, through your own country, the idea that veganism is Western or it's a privileged thing, I think a lot of this is stemming from anger over what is known as the caste system. Can you explain what the caste system is in India? Does it still exist in this day and age? What are the kind of how does that relate to this idea that veganism is white or Western and that you're pushing this kind of privileged thing on people of lower castes, whatever that means?
Right. I think there are separate issues here. One of them is post-colonialism hangover, and the effects, or let's say the the fear that exists in the society. And the other one is the caste system, which existed before the colonialism took place, which existed a lot before that. And I think focusing on the caste system, I would say it does exist. People still proudly say what caste they belong to, which some people find it okay. Some people think it's pointless. Why do you have to divide people on this basis, which has been oppressive in the past? And it's a pyramid. It's not a like in Christians you have the Protestants, you have the Catholics. It's not a pyramid, but the caste system, it's a pyramid, and
Mm.
which is accepted by the people on the top and people on the bottom, the victims and the people who actually oppress. One of the things is the word vegetarianism. People tend to think that it's associated with the caste, where I don't think it has anything to do with caste.
And Piyush,
Uh,
just to interrupt, before
so
we go too deep into that, can you actually explain what the caste system is? Because as I say, I think most of my audience is obviously non-Indian, and there will be many people who just have no idea what the caste system is. Could you just run down what the hell that is for anyone who's like, what the hell is the caste system?
um, so a caste system. This would be very controversial, and I'll tell you what I understand from it. And there would be people arguing. Some of them say that it's introduced by the British. It's been here for like since forever, and some people say, oh no, it's been introduced by the British system. It wasn't like that before. The British changed it. They made it more rigid. So the caste system is basically, it's a pyramid. On the top there are Brahmins. um, Below them there are the Kshatriyas. So the Brahmins are the priests.
Mm-hmm.
The Kshatriyas are the rulers, the warriors. So that's the caste I belong to.
Mm-hmm.
It's on the second tier, and the tier below that is, I think, the merchants, traders, and the tier below that there's one more tier which is, I don't know, some other uh, skilled person, and below that is the Dalits. So Dalits, they actually don't even belong to the pyramid. They're outside the pyramid. They It's so horrible for them that they don't even deserve to be in the pyramid. And they have if you say
What is it
something.
based on though, Piet? Like, so what made you that a high ranking caste person, and what makes a Dalit a Dalit? Like, what is it even based on? Why did they? How did you be born? And they say, right, Piyush, you're a this, and so is a Dalit. How does that happen?
Just because I was born in this family, and my family, my
Right.
parents are born into, someone who was already um, a Kshatriya or a Maratha. That's the caste I belong to, or I belong to. I don't
Right.
believe in that, but so
It
it's based
comes
on your birth.
solely from your family, right? Right. That's so. It's just based on your blood. It's a form of. Is it a form of racism of somewhat, or is it a form of just other kind of prejudice?
So yes, casteism is similar to racism or speciesism. It's another form of oppressive system or hierarchical system that's been created. So it's created by the Brahmins who were on the top. They were the
Mm,
literate ones. They could read the text, the religious text. They could decipher. They could interpret in their own way, and they found the best method to exploit other people. So slavery, it doesn't. It maybe it did exist in some typical forms, but this was as prominent as slavery in the West. So I think this is the equivalent of slavery in the East.
right. And here's the criticism then that you face, Piyush, in India, coming from your background, which you obviously didn't choose. But so you're a Shudra, you said.
Kshatriya.
Kshatriya. So
It's hard
what,
to.
so a Dalit is going to say to you, Piyush, well, you're a Kshatriya. You're just like a privileged so and so. You're from this high ranking caste. You were born into riches or wealth, or you're superior to me by birth. Who are you to come along and tell me um who can't afford to buy this and that, that I should be vegan when you are above me in this caste system? So how do you personally deal then with, I'm sure you've had accusations of that in India. How do you deal with that argument, and how common is it that you might face that kind of argument, being someone who comes from what would be considered a privileged caste in India?
um, yeah, so it's a pyramid, and I am on the second tier of the pyramid. So their complaints, they're usually to the Brahmins. The hostility that exists, it's usually between them and the Brahmins. So I'm in the middle of this. But for Brahmins, it's Brahmins versus everyone else. So for them, you know, Marathas and Dalits, they don't much care about them, how different they are or how superior they are to them. For them, they view themselves as separate, and as they do exercise their privilege in different sorts, which I have experienced myself in the school. Um, so their complaints, the complaints of the Dalits, it's usually towards the Brahmins and not the Kshatriyas, because the Kshatriyas, they were allowed to consume meat, flesh, eggs, and whatnot. They didn't have those they didn't have the connection towards vegetarianism, whereas Brahmins did. And how they see it as an excuse, um, they see that as an attack on their Dalit culture, or they see it how Brahmins tend to link it with purity. So if you eat animals, you're impure. If you don't eat animals, you're pure. And even now, if you visit the high ranked places, the government offices and stuff like that, they don't serve meat here in most of the places, because it's seen as some sort of degenerate practice, which I do believe it is, but for different reasons. And
So if anything, it's actually that meat is associated with the higher castes.
no, it's associated with the lower castes, because Brahmins, they are
Oh,
vegetarians.
right. Okay. Okay. So how do you personally deal then with that? So say someone was to say to you, Piyush, well, you're a Kshatriya. Of course, you think that meat is bad, but you can't tell me what to do. I'm a Dalit or whatever. Like, how would you respond to that argument?
No, actually, that argument is used against the Brahmins because Kshatriyas, Dalits, they're on the same side. They're allowed to eat meat. They don't have any restriction from the religious perspective. So
Oh, so
every
it
time
wouldn't
they
be used at you. They wouldn't say that to you. They
no,
would. Okay.
but in the comment section, I have seen people use that point a lot of times, and they say the Brahmins use that as an excuse to oppress the Dalits, which I understand where they're coming from, but it still doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And again, the focus is shifting from the animals towards the Brahmins.
Hmm.
And again, I go to them and I introduce veganism, which again they find some other way to deflect. And then I say, your argument before was against Brahmins, and what happened to you now? When I tell you that it's regardless of you being a Brahmin or a Dalit, this focuses on the animals, and you shouldn't even be a vegetarian, you should be a vegan.
Hmm.
So, they stick to another excuse. So I think it's just one of the excuses they use, and I think it's pretty uh, baseless. It's a liberal excuse they use here.
Because in the West, we have this whole concept that the intersectionals created white veganism. And it's apparently a way of practicing veganism that is exclusionary to marginalized groups or something like that. Now, in India, you have this term that the Indian intersectionals have created called Brahminical veganism. And it seems to be you guys' equivalent of this magical white veganism, whatever the hell that even is. So, what is Brahminical veganism? What are they? I mean, I'm assuming you don't even believe that there is such a thing. But what is the thing that the intersectionals are claiming Brahminical veganism is?
I think they're referring to Brahminical vegetarianism because Brahmanism is has nothing to do with veganism at all. It's not in their text. It's not practiced. So there is no roots of veganism within Brahmanism. So I think every time they're equivocating the words veganism and
Mm,
vegetarianism. So the appropriate term would be Brahminical vegetarianism because Brahmanism and veganism, they have absolutely nothing in common. Like there's no history, there is nothing written in the texts about veganism. So yes, the appropriate term would be Brahminical vegetarianism. And again, as I said, that's an excuse people use. They would stick to any excuse they can find. Um, again, I try to I ask them to focus their attention from take it away from the Brahmins and focus it on the animals. They are the real victims. If you are a victim, then you should understand how horrible it is to be victimized. So if you are complaining to the Brahmins, like, well done, go and keep complaining and destroy their practices, destroy their vegetarianism by becoming a vegan. You have a
mm.
perfect option. Like you can destroy the bigotry in the Brahminical system at the same time while focusing on the animals.
But I guess one thing though is that when I've seen Indians infighting within the vegan movement, the non-intersectional vegans versus the intersectional vegans in India, I don't get the impression, Piyush, that they're actually saying it to Brahmins in the same way that white veganism here is used. A black person can practice quote unquote white veganism, whatever the hell that is, to an intersectional. But so what I think it seems actually, I don't know if you've noticed that they're using the term to just mean some kind of pompous exclusionary form of veganism that says everyone can be vegan or something like that, but they don't necessarily mean it's Brahmins who are practicing it. They could say it to you. They could say, Piyush, you're not a Brahmin, but you're practicing Brahminical veganism because you said everyone should be vegan. Have you
Hmm.
have you kind of seen that?
Not personally, though. I haven't seen someone use that as an excuse against me because I've
Mm.
argued against a lot of Indians. Um, so that's not the excuse they have used with me, but they have said that it's a privilege. It's a
Mm.
privilege some people have and some people don't. But I haven't seen that excuse being used against me.
Well, I think it's because it's not from non-vegans who say it. It's actually intersectional Indian vegans who say, Piyush, your advocacy is wrong because you are practicing Brahminical veganism, just as they might tell a black guy living in the UK, so and so, you're practicing white veganism by saying that everyone should be vegan, or saying that veganism has nothing to do with human rights, or something like that. So you haven't personally seen like the Indian like intersectional crowd use it to just say it's a type of veganism that's like exclusionary or whatever it is.
No, fortunately not. I think
Yeah.
I have good circle. I don't have beginners who use that excuse. Yeah, I do follow a lot of Indian vegans, and they're pretty good with their arguments. And I've never seen any one of them use it. Fortunately, I don't think they're in large numbers.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the Indian vegan community is pretty solid. I've seen their advocacy online and they tend not to drift into that. However, I have seen some very toxic, like intersectionals in the Indian community in vegan spaces, and that's a term that they throw around. I've seen them do these like 20-page like Instagram carousels called Brahminical veganism, and talking about how people like you, Piyush, are practicing it by saying that everyone should be vegan and blah blah blah. Moving on, what do you then make of the claim veganism is Western? I mean, you can say, let's put aside the whole genetic fallacy thing for a second, and let's be charitable to their argument. Is it the case at all that veganism is Western just because, I don't know, the vegan society was founded in the UK? Or do you think that that's a huge misunderstanding of what veganism is?
So the answer would be yes and no. In some ways, yes. In some ways, no.
Mhm.
So the core principle of non-violence, ahimsa, uh, you hear that from every single part of the world.
Yeah.
In principle, people do understand what it means, what it entails, but sometimes they fail in the practice. So in India, so there's three religions which actively advocate for ahimsa, which is Hinduism, Jainism, and Buddhism.
Yeah.
So those are the three major religions who actively speak up for the innocent and the animals, especially Jainism and Buddhism. They focus on not killing the animals, but unfortunately, they fall short of addressing the dairy issue and how the
Right.
exploitation and how it's systematically, oppressive. So there are roots of non-violence, but the term veganism or the origins of the term veganism, yes, it's Western. So what? What if something is Western? If something is gonna save your life, wouldn't you stick to it, or would you just try to dismiss it based on the origin? So I think credits were due. I think the West does deserve credits for coming up with the term veganism and how efficiently they put the non-violence principles into practice. I
Mhm.
think, yeah, they of course they should have the credit for that.
That's a very good point. Because here's my take on it, right? Veganism has always existed throughout history, and I think the person who one of the oldest vegan texts was written, I think, 1,000 years ago by Al Ma'ari, who's an Arab. Right? He said that it's
Mhm.
wrong to exploit bees for honey. It's wrong to take milk from the cow. It's wrong to take a bird's eggs. It's wrong to wear wool and all this kind of stuff. He's saying in the poem, "I no longer steal from nature." But what I think the West did, or the UK Vegan Society did, is they just formalized it. They made the world's first vegan society. They gave it an actual term, and they said these are the kind of rules, these are the kind of principles of this exact thing. I think you make a very good point that there's some kind of equivocation going on with regards to like the Jains and the Buddhists in India, because yeah, okay, ahimsa, so-called ahimsa, has always been practiced for thousands of years, long before Donald Watson or whoever came up with the word vegan. But they weren't actually generally practicing it as a concept applicable to all animals. They were generally consuming dairy. They saw mother cows as somehow like belonging to them, their bodies being here for us to consume milk. And that leads me on to another good question, actually, because this is an argument that I've actually found fairly difficult to answer as someone who's never been to India. But one argument that I get when I speak to Indians who are from India on street outreach, because when we say Indian in the UK, we have a huge Indian immigrant community in the UK who are like British. You've seen them, right? You see loads of guys, I'm sure, Piyush, who look like you in the UK but have like my accent, right? So it's like but I'm talking about, yeah.
That's how they try to distinguish between me and someone who looks like me based on the accent we have.
Exactly. So when I say Indian, I'm talking about the people who are actually from India that I see on the streets of the UK. And they'll say stuff like, but you don't understand. Like in India, like we have a cow in our household and like we don't steal the milk from her. Her baby is there and we just take the excess milk and no one is killed and it's all happy and no one is harmed and there's no exploitation. There's no slavery. What's the issue with that? Blah, blah, blah. And I've tried to answer it as best as I could before, but I don't even know if I'm doing it justice because I don't, to be honest, I don't fully know the situation. So can you fill us in on that? Are they bullshitting or is there some validity to this?
They are bullshitting 90%. There's 10% validity to it.
Right.
And, I'll try to explain in the best possible way. So even in my, in the house of my relatives, they're farmers. They farm crops and cotton and other grains. They have a cow in their own house, which they regularly milk and take the milk off. And, I've seen them treat them with great care and they show affection. I still think it's problematic on many levels because even if you take the milk of the cow, it's meant for the baby. It's not meant for you. I've seen them tie the calf on some different side of the shed so that it doesn't drink up all the milk the cow is producing. And they use excuses like, oh, the child will die if you let it overfeed it, which is absolutely one of the worst excuses they give. And the cow is tied, the freedom is taken away from her, the cow is confined. Then again, I know they artificially inseminate those cows, they rape the cows. So just because you keep someone in your house and you stroke them once or twice in a day on their head doesn't mean you are being respectful towards them. Like if I chain you, if I keep you in my house and if I stroke you once and twice a day, does that justify me kidnapping you?
Dude, it seems so obvious now because it's like, how were these cows even getting pregnant in the first place? Where does the bull go, the father essentially of the calf? Like, so you're saying these Indians have been talking to me on the streets of the UK and saying, no, there's no exploitation and it's all fine. These people are raping the mother cow that they keep at home with like a steel rod and all that kind of stuff?
Some of them, they resort to that practice. The others, they use rape rack. Have you heard of the term rape rack?
Of course, yeah.
Yes. So tell me which one is worse. I don't know. And either way, I think it's horrible. So they tie the cow, then they let the bull mount on the cow, then they exploit her again and again. So I don't think it's any way better, even if you use the steel rod or not. It's still horrible in so many ways.
I mean, it's even not that I want to sound like a massive welfarist, but it sounds even worse than the whole backyard egg thing. I mean, the backyard egg thing we often refute here because we get that on the streets of the UK all the time, and I'm sure you get it in India as well. Oh, I have chickens in my back garden and blah blah blah. But I always guess I had the misconception that could actually be worse than the Indians with the mother cow in their house, from what these Indians have been telling me. But actually, it seems now that you're telling me about this, that the mother cow in the household is actually worse, if anything, than the backyard eggs.
Oh, definitely. There's no comparison. There's a lot of problems with that. And yeah, first of all, you're stealing the baby, you're keeping the baby away from the cow, then you're stealing the milk, and you keep the cow confined for her whole life. And that's something that's problematic on so many levels. And when you listen to the background eggs argument, I think it's much less worse compared to this. Again, I know in principle we are both abolitionists,
Yeah.
but if we are gonna consider the pain and the level of suffering, then I think it's much worse what the cow goes through.
Well,
Even
yeah,
in the
no,
best possible scenarios, I'm not even
yeah,
talking about the dairy industries in India. I'm
yeah,
talking about the best scenarios. It's still
yeah.
wrong on so many levels. And the best way to address that is, would you be okay if your mother was subjected to the same treatment? Even if you
Mm,
think it's a good treatment, would you be okay if your mother was
mm.
used in the same way?
Yeah, no, this is very useful insight. Thank you for this, Piyush, because I think a lot of people, especially not in India, would have trouble dealing with that argument because we don't see and we don't know what's going on. And you've seen this kind of stuff. Let's talk now about intersectionality because we've mentioned the word a few times on the podcast. And what would a carnism debunked podcast be without bringing up my favorite subject of intersectionality? So,
You love controversial topics. I mean, I
me,
appreciate
no.
you for doing that, because when I joined the vegan community, I was inclined to just be on board with the liberal views and with the liberal ideology. So right now I would have been pro LGBTQ, I would have been pro Palestine, without knowing a single thing about them, without knowing the history, without knowing the consequences of supporting either of them. So, and when I met people like you, I was like, oh no, there is some critical thinking that exists in the community. And of course we should question everything regardless. So I was also committing a genetic fallacy. I was just looking at the argument from the source. Oh, it's coming from a vegan, I trust this vegan, so he must be right. But no, that's
Mm.
not how it usually is. So I'm glad there are people like you who speak upon these issues. And we need resistance from the other side. We don't want the pendulum to swing too much on either of the sides. We need some reasonable middle ground.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, the thing is, this is what I keep hammering home about intersectionality is we all of us here believe that we should be against all forms of oppression. The problem is we all have different opinions on what oppression is. So it doesn't make sense to just smush this into the animal rights movement and just put it from one side of the political spectrum, because the way intersectionals apply it is as if they have the kind of objective moral truth about what is oppression and what is not. And they do this by this simplistic dichotomy of left wing equals anti oppression, right wing equals oppression, when really it doesn't work like that. Okay, so in America, for example, a pro gun person is pro gun not because they support oppression in their mind, it's because they're anti oppression. So
Mm-hmm.
they say, yeah, I agree. We should be against all oppression. Vegans should be pro-gun. We should have the right to arm ourselves, to defend ourselves. We shouldn't let the government be able to take our forms of self-defense away. That's oppression. That's tyranny. So that's just one. Abortion, for example. Intersectionals say yes, aren't vegans meant to be against all oppression? Of course, we shouldn't force women to endure a pregnancy that they don't want. But then the pro-lifers say, well, no, but the oppressive thing here is you're murdering billions of babies, millions of babies, whatever it is, every single year in the biggest human holocaust that's ever happened. That's oppression. So that, for me, is the key problem with intersectionality. Is it posits one side as anti-oppression and truth, um, and just thinks that vegans should have this uniform view on all of those things.
Yeah, I mean, it's very naive how simplistic they make everything sound, as if
Mm,
morality was so easy to address and all of these issues were as straightforward as they make them look like. When there are consequences, there's history, there's a billion factors which is almost impossible for someone to consider in their lifetime. And that's why we struggle with morality, we struggle with these issues. That's why we have these issues in the first place, is that we didn't evolve to be rational, or we didn't evolve to be moral persons. We just evolved to survive. And you know navigating in this world with her apish instincts, it's incredibly hard. So if you ask me if I'm an intersectionalist, I would say yes, I am. But in principle, in
Yeah.
practice, it doesn't work out like that. It's not as easy as it sounds. Like, it was in my Instagram bio for, I don't know, for 6 months or something, that I'm an intersectional vegan, because I was against all forms of oppression.
Right.
But then I saw that these issues, they're very hard to deal with, and people don't want to be reasonable just because you stick an issue on the left side, on the leftist wing.
Hmm.
That doesn't automatically make it very easy for you to solve it. And they are humans at the end of the day. They could be wrong, and the people on the left, they need to realize that they could be making mistakes, they could be making errors. I
Mm.
understand where they're coming from, I understand their intentions, I completely validate that. But I'm not going to validate everything you say, every single thing you say, because you might be wrong, I could be wrong, and
Yeah.
we need to all sit down and critically think about it. And I see that they have this double standard every single time they bring up an issue. Is they don't want people to censor anyone. But at the same time, if you happen to be pro-life, or you happen to be not on the same page as the recent LGBTQ definitions,
Hmm.
then it's a huge problem, and they wouldn't engage in the conversations. You must have seen my Facebook, on my Facebook feed.
Yeah.
People are refusing to engage in conversations, and you can see people on both sides of this debate. It's like a violent pendulum swing. They're not willing to compromise and find a reasonable ground, and the reasonable ground doesn't have to be the middle ground. Sometimes you have to accept and admit that it could be on either side, or it could be in the middle. You just have to be rational and think about it, because if you're going to lie, if you're not going to be truthful to yourself, then you're going to put all the people in danger, including the people you're supporting,
Hmm.
in many forms. I can demonstrate to you.
Well, I think what you touched on there, it goes into one of my observations that I think the majority of intersectionals are practitioners of the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is just being insanely highly confident about issues you actually know little about. And the it's like the less you know about the issue, the more confident you are in it. Like, I'd be just like you, I'm willing to admit that I could be wrong about all of the opinions I hold. So I believe that I'm against all oppression, right? However, I could be wrong about every opinion I have. I could take the wrong stance on every little socio political issue there is. I'm willing to admit that I could be wrong. They're not. They genuinely believe that they have the exact objective, like moral truth. They know all the answers to like abortion, gun control, trans women in women's spaces, Israel Palestine, all these issues that like there are these massive debates on either side of the political spectrum that I could be wrong about, you could be wrong about, they could be wrong about, but they're so confident in their positions that they're right, that they're willing to literally kick people out of the movement, out of animal
Hmm.
rights groups for having a
Hmm.
different opinion on them about all of these highly contentious issues that they could be wrong about. It's so arrogant.
It's arrogant, it's very disturbing, and it's taking the focus away. I think it was you who used the term, it's a Trojan horse.
Yeah.
Was it you who used the term? And I think it's one of the
Yeah.
most accurate terms you can use for this. So I understand that people want to be against all sorts of oppressions. So do I. But if we are doing activism for the animals, it's better to focus on the animals.
Hmm.
And these people, they join the group, they express their discomfort over another activist holding different opinion, which has nothing to do with the animals. And they try to get banned. One of the activists was trying to get someone banned for liking Ricky Gervais.
Yeah, I know about
I
this
mean,
incident. Yeah, I know about this.
and I mean, he's a comedian. First of all, he makes fun of every single topic you can ever possibly find, and he just skull fucks the topic. So if you're going to be offended,
Yeah.
if you're going to be offended with comedy, then I don't know what to say to you. But if you're offended and if someone likes it, just come to the activism, focus on the animals. Don't invite them to your birthday party. It's as
Yeah.
simple. It's as straightforward.
Yeah,
And
I
another
think,
thing,
yeah.
the consequence of this is a lot of other people from the right wing, they have stopped doing activism, or they no longer feel welcome in the groups. And I have the same question to them. Just because someone from the left was mean to you, why do you think you feel unwelcome to speak up for the animals? Why don't you just all collectively focus on the animals? And if they are incapable of doing that, why are you also becoming incapable? Why can't you focus on the animals? I'm pretty sure most of them, they just dropped out of their free will instead of getting banned. Like, I was banned from one of the groups, and it was a personal fight between two activists. I'd
Hmm.
rather not go in detail.
Hmm.
And it had absolutely nothing even remotely to do with animals. And you know they always have some victim cards in their bag. They use it whenever it's convenient for them. And so that person used the victim card and got me banned. I was like, dude, screw your socials. I'm not coming here for your socials. I'm not
Yeah.
coming to Vantra after the event. No, I'm here for the animals. I'll come, I'll do my job, and I'll leave. It's not that I love doing activism. I really don't. I don't like speaking on the mic. I bought
Mm.
this mic like 7 years ago because I wanted to do videos on YouTube. I just couldn't. The mic was eating dust. Now I had to check if the mic is still working.
Wow, Piyush has broken out the mic, everyone, for the Carnage Debunk podcast. That's awesome. And yeah, you know what? Let's rib the right wing vegans as well who do that, who say, "Oh, I'm leaving the vegan movement because a left winger was mean to me," or like that. That literally sounds as ridiculous as when non-vegans say I won't go vegan because a vegan was mean to me. You can't quit activism entirely because an intersexual. We've all had run-ins with intersexuals. Look at me. I'm targeted by them all the time. I'm not going to leave the vegan movement anytime soon. If anything, it
Anytime
makes.
soon. What do you mean?
Well, yeah. Maybe you could push me over the edge one day, Piyush. I don't know. No. The thing is, if anything, it makes me want to fight back against this nonsense stronger. I think the biggest example of this was, and this is a funny observation actually that I've made, because they tend to say that as the Overton window shifts, to the left or becomes more woke, we'll be more open to veganism and the activism will be stronger. I found actually the opposite was true. Look at 2020 when the animal rights movement was the biggest joke that it's ever been, where literally people were cancelling people for talking about animal rights after George Floyd's death. Yeah.
Hmm.
Why are you posting about this, vegan group? Why aren't you posting about BLM instead? Like the movement was just a complete joke. It sold out. It was like an embarrassment to animals. Now that a lot of these people have left the movement, and now that the Overton window has shifted and people are waking up to the fact that woke is just idiocy and people are becoming more offensive now, the Overton window is, I mean, you go into, holy shit, you go into platforms like X now and it's just like an offensive, often right-wing shit show, right? But the vegan movement has got stronger since 2020, since the Overton window has shifted. That's to say, in 2025, the world is less woke than it was in 2020. And now we're seeing activists back on the streets for AV, for We Stand for the Animals. And I'm not talking about, people will say, oh, it was COVID. No, I'm talking about even just before COVID hit and the world was like super woke, we were seeing like smaller groups. The activism scene was just kind of dwindling. And I think wokeism had a lot to do with that. I think we had a less focused movement. I think there was more infighting. It was toxic. I don't know. What do you agree with my
Mhm.
observation that the activism scene has got back on track as like the world is less woke recently?
I think it's getting back on track. I don't think we are quite there yet. I don't
Yeah,
think we
sure.
have found a reasonable middle ground. But uh, every single day I wake up, I find another issue, another fight, and I don't know which way we are heading towards.
Mm.
Um, but I've seen post 2020, there's a dramatic rise of people doing activism, and like, don't get me started with the whole Black Lives Matter. Uh, oh, sorry, I'm lost for words. Controversy with
Mm.
Anonymous for the Voiceless. I think I think AV were absolutely in the right with whatever they did with every single statement they gave, but I could be wrong. Fine, you're not going for an outrage to support Paul Bashir. You're not funding his, private jet, or you're not buying him a yacht or anything. Speaking up for the animals doesn't give him money or doesn't help him in any way. Or, I understand some people, they have different opinions. Like Hannah Blake, she had different opinion than Paul Bashir. Like, fine, you guys, she started her own thing and it's massively successful as well. And I appreciate when people do that. If you are not on the same page, fine. Don't stop speaking up for the animals. They need you. Maybe you should be louder. Like Hannah Blake, she was louder than she was before, I think. And just keep doing that. Start making videos if you feel uncomfortable by all of them. And just sometimes you have to man up and go out there and just face things. I don't think anyone hates activism more than I do, because how
Mm.
uncomfortable it makes me feel. But if I'm gonna compare my discomfort with what the animals are going through, it's just zero. It's down to zero, absolutely zero.
Yeah, and just so everyone is aware of who Piyush is talking about, Hannah Blake founded We Stand for the Animals. It's a separate outreach group, and you can do their activism in London, and you can do that as well as AV, as Piyush said, and as well as We the Free as well, who I volunteer with regularly. So plenty of outreach groups for everyone to get involved with, and you don't need to align with whoever founded it in any way. If you just get out there and speak for the animals, well said. Piyush, I want to end now with something totally irrelevant to anything really that we've discussed so far in the podcast. And we only need to touch on this briefly. And this is just out of interest. And I'm only asking you this actually because you're an Indian guest of mine. And I like to talk about stuff to my guests that are somehow relevant or I can get information from. What's going on with this seemingly targeted, like anti-Indian hate that we're seeing online lately? Because I think no one can fail to notice there seems to be this smear campaign against India that we're seeing on social media. You go online now and there's these, like, let's face it, absolutely disgusting, like, street food videos. I'm sure you've seen them, and I'm sure it's not a reflection on the whole of India, which is a huge place. I'm sure you do have perfectly good, like, you can get amazing street food in India with great hygiene and stuff like that. But you've seen the videos I'm talking about where they're pretty much pouring slop in a bucket and scratching their armpits and stuff like that. And it's just like, dude. And we're seeing, like, all these comments all over the place, delete India and all this kind of stuff. Who's behind this campaign? Why is it happening? Like, what's going on here?
I think a user's feed is curated for his personal interests. So it's based on your reflection.
There we
So
go.
I
It's
think
my
I
anti-Indian.
haven't
Yeah.
seen it. It's just you. No. So jokes aside, yes, I have seen a lot of videos of street food, then AI generated Indian street food of them, like putting their feet in the food and serving
Yeah. Yeah.
people, and it's a parody, it's a mimicry. Um, I think as someone who enjoys dark humor, uh, I'm unqualified to talk on this
Mm.
because if you look at my feed, it's horrific. Like it's gonna, if I'm dating someone and if she sees my feed, she's gonna be absolutely worried about my mental health. But I think that's just the kind of humor I enjoy. But again, at the same time, I don't know what the consequences of this are if people are actually are actually, you know having a sense of dislike towards Indians because of that. And I do see a lot of comments. I do see a lot of people calling me Pajit, which
Mhm.
we don't even use that word in India. But
Right.
every time I talk about veganism, I think that's going up. Every second comment I see, it's, oh, Pajit, sir, please don't tell us about your uh, ideology, sir, the whole sir thing,
Right.
which is kind of embarrassing.
Right.
um, Again, I'm fine with that. It doesn't affect me, but I see how that can turn into something that's hateful, and that how that can separate people. At the same time, I also see how the hate is rising towards black people in general, and I think it's just non-white communities who tend to focus on that. But to be honest, I don't see much on the white communities, jokes being made on the white communities. Um, I don't know what the actual reason behind that is, and I think the consequences of that could be, if that just becomes serious, if the humor is, it
Mhm.
doesn't stay as a humor, and if it starts affecting people subconsciously, then it could be problematic.
So I've heard different theories from various Indians about who's behind this seemingly targeted hate campaign against India online. All these videos just seemingly going up at the same time, and like all these like comments. One of the theories I've heard is that it's like a coordinated campaign from the American far right and from pro-Palestinian Muslims in like Pakistan to like
Hmm.
destabilize India and just make it look really bad. Um, so from the far right, it's that they don't. Indians are a very common immigrant group to the West, so it's just that they don't want you guys to come over here, whatever. And then from the Muslims in Pakistan, it's because they see India are siding with Israel too much in the ongoing conflict, and they just want to say "fuck you, India" and just make it look like a really shit, terrible country. Do you think there's any merit to this claim that it's like this coordinated attack from like the far right and from Muslims, or do you think that that's bullshit and it's just yeah?
Hmm. I mean, I think that's a very logical explanation. It could happen because, as we see immigration, we see a lot of people immigrating in the US, in the UK, Germany, and all of the European nations. And I understand if people are concerned about it. Like, I would be concerned if I saw, if I was a white British person, and if I saw so many people coming in and not getting mixed with the culture, or not understanding the culture and trying to somehow be on the same page as the white people. And it's not just about the culture, it's not about celebrating Christmas or anything. It's about having civic sense, it's about understanding the rules, it's about having some decency or some formal rules when you speak to someone, even though there's a saying, when in Rome, do as Romans do.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you're right as an Indian, if you're not doing something that's inherently wrong, I think it's still your responsibility to understand the culture you're going into, and how you can fit in, and how you can best um, everyone feel comfortable, including yourself. And I think I managed to do that pretty well. I think a lot of people felt safe with me. They felt nice with me. I've had so many conservative friends. I think the closest friends who helped me in the UK were conservative. They're super conservative, and
Mm-hmm.
all the liberal ones who seem to care about you, they were the first ones to follow me in the past couple of few days. And not a single one of them cared to reach out to me and ask me about like what's happening in my mind. So that's a whole pendulum thing. It's power dynamics. Sometimes it's with the left, sometimes it's with the right. And if you're in the power, you tend not to care much about other people. You tend not to think much because you're in the safe zone.
Mm-hmm.
um, and
So
in
who
some
who do you
ways,
think is behind it though, Piyush? Like who like do you just don't know?
now I don't know, but taking a logical crack, it could be someone, far right, Western white people. It could be.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure it's a lot of Pakistani population as well, and
Right.
a lot of Muslim population within India as well. It's really hard for me to just say this, but um, a lot of Muslims in India, they have so much hatred, and they love Pakistan, or they love Islamic nations, and they want India to follow Sharia law. They want the UK to follow Sharia law, and India and Pakistan, they have been having these feuds since, like, I don't know, 1947.
Oh
And
yes.
I'm pretty sure they do have substantial amount. If you say that out of 100%, I'm pretty sure they have substantial percentage of the accounts who are forwarding this. But at the same time, most of the videos, or at least some of the videos, they're genuinely horrible. There are genuinely horrible street vendors out there who don't
Yeah.
maintain the hygiene, and who make India look like a bad place.
Right.
There are some Indians who don't know how to have a conversation with someone um, who is foreign, and you should have some filter when you speak, and not. speak about private parts and stuff like that.
Right.
This might get me cancelled now, but honestly, I have seen that happen. And, I think both of them, if they could take a collective responsibility, I think, and if the West isn't willing to, or if the Muslims aren't willing to, there is something you can do as an Indian. Okay, let's assume that the people in the West and the Muslims or the Pakistanis, they're trying to smear my reputation. Okay, but what can I do as a person, as an individual? There's so many things I can improve on. There's so many things I can do to make this world a better place to live in and serve as an example instead of just sitting back and complaining. So I'm not much focused on that issue. I don't want to have that sense of victimhood, because it keeps growing in you, and it just destroys you from the inside.
All right. Yeah. Well, thanks for your explanation on that then, Piyush. We'll end the podcast there, but just before we go, make your elevator speech, as it were, your final message to a person who says, Piyush, veganism is a white privileged movement. Go.
I would ask them, is it a privilege not to murder someone? Do you not have the cognitive ability to understand um, who the actual victim here is? And do you not have the cognitive ability to focus on the victim and make moral choices? Are you incapable of making moral choices? If you are capable, then it has nothing to do with the West or the white people. So it's as simple as that. Just focus on the victims. And if you feel victimized, then you should know you should be the first person to speak up for the victims.
Yep, very well said. Thank you, Piyush. Really appreciate you coming on to the show today.
Thank you so much. It's a privilege.